This is Robin McKenzie, Youth Ministry 6.3. I am with Jennifer Gerhardt from Round Rock, Texas, and we're going to talk a little bit about modesty. She agreed to do this, and she's on a little bit of a journey. But before we get that, Jennifer, if you don't mind, tell us who you are besides your name and what you do and where you're at and so forth.
Okay. Well, I am who you are. Wow, that's like a...
I know.
I guess right now I'm a Christian. I'm a mom. I'm a wife. And I'd see a lot of my job is tied up in being a preacher's wife. Mm-hmm. And so I guess that's me. I'm also a writer. And so I do a lot of just kind of freelance stuff right now because I'm at home with my kids full time.
Great. I'm interviewing Jennifer about a podcast that I heard. It's actually a series of lessons that her husband Justin was doing at Round Rock Church, and I believe that the series was old school, if I got it correct, and the particular aspect was old school modesty, and I believe is the second part in that series, and back maybe done in early April, and so I heard this journey that Jen started earlier in the year. And so Jen, just tell us what is that journey, what started that journey, and kind of give us some background to that.
Okay. Well, I am doing a project. I even have like a title for it. It's Change of Clothes, a 365-day experiment in radical modesty. So what I'm doing is I'm spending this year, basically from my 30th birthday until my 31st birthday, wearing only 4 outfits. And these are 4 outfits that are extremely or radically modest. And so I guess what this was born out of is I'm 30 years old, right? I've been a woman for 30 years, picking out and loving clothes. And yet, for that entire time, I've had a really complicated relationship to those clothes. And I've really struggled to define for myself what modest is, what modest looks like, and what being modest is all about. And so this year, I wanted to take a year to figure that out. And really, I'd say more than a year, because it took me 6 months to pick the clothes.
Oh, wow.
That's a big process because I needed to figure out what I felt like the standards should be, what did radical modesty look like, and all of that. So it was a complicated process. But the idea for me has been to figure out what a godly woman wears, and how she wears it, and all of that. So the limited amount of clothes I think is a part of that, but it's also just forced me to not think about my clothes as much, what I think is also a part of modesty. It's an internal versus external kind of mindset, where you think a lot more about your inside than you do about your outside.
Absolutely. Now you alluded to it a little bit, but what specifically, was there something specific that led you to begin this journey? Maybe a book, or maybe just some things that have gone on in your life? What led you to begin this project?
Yeah, okay, well, a couple things. Let's see. For one, I have kids, and I ended up needing to buy a lot of clothes recently. And so I've been trying on clothes and things, and really feeling unsure of my standards of modesty. And so, I'd buy something and think it was modest, and then get it home and put it on and feel like it wasn't. And so there was a lot of conflict in me internally. And I was really struggling with it. I also moved to a warm climate place, in a church that wasn't quite as buttoned up as a church I'd been in before. And so I just happened to see a lot of people wearing things that I was a little surprised at. So that too started getting my internal radar on. I was like, maybe my standards are too strict, maybe my standards aren't strict enough, and I wanted to figure that out. And so I had a lot of stuff, like turmoil inside me. And then I heard this Andy Stanley sermon where he was really working through Romans 12 and talking about what it meant not to conform to the world and what it meant to be transformed and to renew your mind. And so that really spurred me into thinking that's what I need to do. And he talked about how renewing your mind is taking all the lies that are in it that culture has told you and getting rid of the lies and replacing those lies with truth. And with God's truth about whatever. And he said, it was I just was struck. I was on a road trip, and I didn't realize this was going to hit me like it did. But I'm driving, and he's like, if there's ever a topic that whenever it comes up, you feel kind of inside, like it hits you and you feel a little conflicted and a little frustrated and maybe even mad when somebody talks to you about it. He said, then that's something where you're probably believing a lie and that you need to replace that with truth. And I was like, oh, crud, that's fine. And kind of realized in that moment that was me, that there was a lie in there that I was probably believing and that I needed to figure out what the truth was. And so I think in a lot of ways this experiment is an effort for me to figure out that truth so that I can put it inside me and live that instead of the lie I've been living.
So how long have you done this so far? When's your next birthday, I should say?
Well, it was January 20th.
Okay,
so
okay. That's actually my youngest son is actually born January 20th. He turned a year old this past January 20th. So that's
it's a great day. It's the day all are inaugurated.
Absolutely. So what have you learned since January about yourself and about God? If there's anything specific, what have you learned since you started this project?
Well, I've learned, a few things. I've learned that, for one, modesty is not about clothes. And I guess I found that surprising. That modesty really is something that's an internal virtue that grows in you and then slowly manifests itself in clothes. It's really not about what you wear. And for me, I'm a person who loves clothes and has always put a lot of emphasis on clothes. And so I guess for this project, I've been able to completely eliminate thinking about clothes. And that's been really healthy for me and helped me to prioritize things the way they need to be prioritized. And I think that's a big part of modesty. You look at Peter when he's talking about women and their outward adornment, and his big thing is that you really need to be concentrated on the inner woman. I'm looking at the passage right now. He says, and I move you, Robbie. Hold on the screen. He says, your beauty should not come from outward adornment, such as elaborate hairstyles and the wearing of gold or fine clothes. Rather, it should be that of your inner self, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit. And I think sometimes it takes something radical like this experiment to push the outer beauty away, like really, really limit its importance in your life so that you can see that actually you do end up cultivating your inner spirit more. And it's funny, like when I wear the same clothes, people don't compliment me on my clothes anymore because they're kind of used to my clothes, and they don't even look at them. And at this point, everybody in my life is so familiar with the outfits I wear that it's almost like it's a way of not being in clothes without being naked. Like they're just not a distraction. They're not in between me and other people. It's like Jennifer's uniform, and so they've been able to see the inside of me a lot more quickly. And I get weird compliments about other strange parts. Like people never compliment you on how, gentle you are.
Right.
Because it's quick and easy to compliment somebody on a superficial element of themselves. But I've basically taken that away from people, and it kind of frustrates them at first.
Sure.
They can't just say, "Oh, cute shoes."
Yeah.
They have to come up with something else to say, and they have to notice other things, and they do, and that's been really surprising to me.
That's good. What have been some of the most difficult components of this journey?
Well, I think the monotony of it is difficult. And for me, I really tried to, I really like to express myself through clothing. And I'm kind of I don't think I'm a loud person, but I'm a very expressive person. And so, my clothes tend to be very, I don't know, they're not, screaming. I'm not wearing cheetah print all over or anything. But at the same time, I like for people to notice my clothes, And so it's been frustrating having to wear things that I'm absolutely exhausted with, that I'm completely bored with, that I don't even think are cool anymore. So that's been hard. But I will tell you that the hardest part of this whole journey was buying the clothes, because it is not easy to dress modestly, and I think that's one of the maybe that's a stumbling block that we put in the way of people, especially young girls, when we're trying to teach them to dress modestly. We act like it's not a big deal or it won't be hard. Like, just go buy modest clothes. Well, that's tough. In fact, like, I had made a rule that I wanted neck to knee, everything was neck to knee. And so I, at least. And so I went to, like, Old Navy to buy t-shirts, the crew neck t-shirts. And their crew neck t-shirts were too low. Because I had I had rules about what I have to do in the dressing room, about being in different positions so that I can see my clothes from all angles to know if I'm being modest, if when I'm bent over, people see things that they shouldn't see. And so the crew neck t-shirts at Old Navy were too low. And I was like, God, are you kidding me? This is the highest neck they have in this whole store. And stuff like that, it just kept coming up. In fact, for me, I ended up totally nixing jeans. I'm not wearing any jeans in this 4 outfits because I couldn't find any that I felt matched my kind of radical modesty experiment. And so, and that's, like, everybody's body's different. Everybody's going to have different things they struggle to clothe appropriately. But for me, the jeans were a really tough one, and so I just ended up having to go another way and just, like, wear dresses over my skinny jeans or something. But it was finding the clothes, finding things that I liked, that I felt were me, and that were appropriate for my standards and the guidelines that I had set in place, was really hard.
Yep. Going kind of in a different direction, what has been, just a couple more questions, what has been, you mentioned a surprising, something that surprised you was people had to come up with different compliments and come up with different things, which is good, and a different way to compliment you. But what are some other things that have surprised you, some things that have been absolutely wonderful blessings that you have encountered during this project?
Okay, well, I'm trying to think. There's a lot. I know I was talking to my husband the other day, and he was saying, "So, how does it feel? How are you doing?" Just checking in on me to make sure I wasn't going insane. And I said, I feel really covered. And I don't know why that word kept coming up, but I feel that way. I feel very covered all the time. And it's the word God uses, right, when he talks about Adam and Eve and clothes in the garden. He says he gives them these animal skins to cover them. And even when Adam and Eve make the little fig leaves and stuff, I think it's funny that we think that they're like a stone some girls recently. It's not like Adam and Eve had double-sided tape. And they taped the little leaves like in the right places. They sewed something.
Right.
Right. They're trying to cover themselves, and it's called a covering, what they were trying to do. And so that's what clothes are for. It's for covering. But for, I guess, a lot of culture doesn't see it that way, right? Clothes are sometimes used actually to uncover or to accentuate what's uncovered or whatever. And so I've actually genuinely seen my clothes as coverings, and it feels kind of like a suit of armor. Yep. Like, I feel strong when I walk out the door. I feel protected. I don't feel like I don't feel vulnerable. I think all of that has been great. I feel very free. I think liberated. I don't feel like people are staring at me in ways they shouldn't. I don't worry about the guy behind me in line at Chick-fil-A. I don't worry at all about that. I'd never get catcalled. And that's really good. Like, because before, I don't know, you kind of want that as a woman. But when you start thinking about what it is, you start realizing, no, you don't want that. That's not a good thing. I've also noticed that, like, when I talk to guys at church, they talk to me. Like, they look at me. They don't look at my clothes. They don't try to look away because they're afraid of what they might see.
Sure.
And I've been in groups of circles with other women who are wearing things that I kind of am not looking at. I'm trying to avert my eyes. And I notice that, like, men won't even talk to them in the circle, at church, because they're just trying not to have to be tempted by that. And so I have, like, genuine, real conversations with men.
That's great.
That's great. And, too, like, I've got little kids, and I don't worry about crawling up the playground at Chick-fil-A.
Right.
I don't let that get in the way of my life, right? I'm able to just live my life, and I don't have to worry about whatever, wind.
Right. Oh, that's awesome. You talked about, we talked a little bit earlier about teaching, and you mentioned, or at least wrote down 2 mistakes that youth ministers make in teaching modesty, I believe is what the way you worded it. So kind of, what are those two mistakes? And you talked about 2 negative effects as well. Just take those in order and talk about those.
Yeah. I think there's 2. I think the first one is that we make modesty about rules and externals, right? So when we teach modesty, we teach inches and guidelines and that kind of thing, which is a problem for several reasons. For one, because your rules are going to be different than rules they hear somewhere else. Mm-hmm. I think about all the camps I went to when I was in high school, and every single one of them had a different shorts length that was required, and that can be confusing for kids if they think modesty is about rules.
Right.
Because they're like, okay, well, which is modest? Is modest to my knee? Is modest a card's length above my knee? Is it my fingertips? And all of a sudden we give them all these different gauges of modesty. And then it becomes difficult for them to really decide what modesty truly is. Modesty grows out of a beautiful heart, right? Modesty is something that comes from a girl who has a gentle spirit, a girl who's submissive, a girl who loves God and other people. And when she has those kinds of priorities, then you don't have to worry about her. She needs direction still. But those are the kinds of things that are really going to make a person modest for life. And they're going to give them the tools they need to make good decisions as they go down the road. And so I think that's a big deal, that we don't make it about inches. We make it about attitudes that are going to help make them modest. The other one is funny. I think it's sort of on the other end. I think youth ministers who make the first mistake don't make the second one. The ones who make the second one don't make the first. But the second one is this idea that modest is hottest. Like, I've seen that for girl retreat titles and stuff like that. Modest is hottest, or it's hot to be modest, or you can still be cool and be modest. Yep. And I think there's some problems with that. For one, because the word hot is it's the world's word, right? That's not a God word.
Right.
And it's like saying you can still be sexy and be modest. No, you can't.
Right.
I mean, the word sex is in the word sexy, and it's not something you want to be. And yet we sort of have that goal, like, well, I still want to be hot. Well, as long as that's in our kids' brains, they've just got the wrong goal, right? They're really still being conformed to the world, because the lie the world says is being hot is important, and being good looking, your exterior is extremely important, and that's not what we want kids to believe. So long as our modesty lessons are all wrapped up in how you can still look cool and be modest, or anything like that, we're not addressing the lie.
Absolutely.
We're really just dealing with superficial stuff. And I think we really need to get in there and transform them before they're able to be modest.
Very good. Now you talked about, and I didn't. This is all framed from a woman's perspective. But what do you have to say to maybe guys as well in your sort of? And I'm sure you've had discussions. Well, how do guys do things like this? So what would you say to guys?
Well, I guess before I had done this lesson, I had thought of ways that guys could be immodest outside of clothing, because there are some pretty significant ones. But my husband Justin and I just split. We've been working with the teenagers at our church, and just recently he talked to the guys and I talked to the girls, and we were surprised to find out that the girls think the guys dress pretty immodestly. Wow. I was really surprised. And the guys feel a little bit of burden there. They want to make sure they're being modest. And I think, well, I guess for one, it's basically shirts off, right?
Yep.
Guys walking around with their shirts off. I mean, that's kind of the cool thing to do. And for the girls, that was really distracting, because it's not so much that girls are going to lust if a guy has his shirt off. They might, but they might not. It's different for us. But at the same time, it's incredibly distracting. And what it does is it creates sexual tension.
Sure.
And a girl doesn't want to have to be thinking about sex ever in the presence of a guy. And so that's what it does. It sort of inserts that, and it makes a lot of tension. So shirts off is a big one. And then the other thing that guys do when they dress immodestly is when they're trying to be funny. And so, for example, recently I went to a guy's beauty pageant. It was a high school guy's beauty pageant. And a lot of the guys wore things like really short, tight shorts, or like rip their t-shirt off in the middle of the show or whatever. And I mean, my brother used to do this all the time in college. He wore things that were ridiculous. I mean, really over the top. Immodest, but it was a joke, right, for him. He's like, this is just funny. And what guys don't realize is that in being funny, what they're doing is still creating that sexual tension for the girls. Like they've basically charged the room with this sexual energy that is inappropriate. And so you've got guys saying, man, guys use the word sexy as a joke all the time. And it's just not good for the girls. And so with their clothes, a lot of times it's going to be humorous, especially if you're not ripped, right? And so that's part of it. I think that's one way that guys can be immodest.
That's great. Well, Jen, I appreciate you so much. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this. Hang on a little bit. This is Jennifer Gerhardt. I've already pre-purchased her book that she hasn't finished yet because I know whatever you write is going to be absolutely amazing.
Okay.
I'll put a link to your blog here so everyone can check it out and check it out. She always writes amazing. But thank you, Jen, so much for being on here.
Thanks. I appreciate it.